Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Frame Found Podcast. I am your host, Chris Tinsley, and for today's episode, we are going to be talking about the concept of sent does not mean received. So what I mean by that is, I think it's just maybe indicative of like the modern era of work, but just really the whole advent of like text-based communication. And when I say text-based, I mean like email and Slack messages and text messages and things of that nature, right? I think that there's been this interesting propensity, and it's just like it's a writ large kind of comment, right? But it's this whole, we've all kind of experienced it in one way or another, right? The kind of, did you not see my email? Or, like, did you not receive my email? Or just things where it kind of like defers the accountability or the responsibility, so to speak, onto like the medium of communication or the mode of communication. It's like, just because you send an email doesn't mean that that it was received by the other party, right? That's why it's always important to kind of get confirmation that the message was like received. I think it's really interesting when you look at other, other, like throughout like the history of time, like different organizations or groups of people. If you look at like radio, like etiquette, just the whole concept of like, a message is sent to somebody, right? And then the person on the receiving end says something along like, like the lines of like copy that, or like Roger, or, in the case of like a kitchen, if you're a fan of like, of FX's like The Bear, the TV show, you hear a term like herd. I just think it's very interesting that we don't view that as like a problem, I guess. I think, and again, I say it every episode, but like the increasing complexity of work, I think that there's like these fundamental practices or concepts of like being able to communicate in a short, succinct way, to a person, and for that person to confirm receipt of that message. I just think that like, maybe I'll do another episode about this, but like just the whole concept of like text-based communication is like, it's like I'm here with a stack of like Post-it notes or pieces of paper, and I'm writing a message on it, and then I'm like throwing it across like the room, lands on someone's desk, right? Thinking that that was enough to communicate something that needs to get done. I think, and that's okay. I think I'm not like dogging text-based communication by any means, right? I think that there's a time and a place for it. But like if you're looking for an urgent response, the mode of communication should have urgency like baked into it, in the sense that if you're talking to somebody and you say something to somebody, you're going to instantly know if they're going to respond or not. It's almost like, I don't even know how to really articulate that one. Like, you know what I'm trying to say though, right? It's like, if you're having a conversation with somebody and you say something to them and they don't respond, then you immediately know, okay, they did not understand what it is that like you said or something. I mean, obviously you would hope that they would ask, like a follow-up question, right? But at least you get that instant understanding that like, oh, there's a gap here, right? And I think when we look at like text-based communication, that's totally fine. Like if you're willing to wait for a response, then I think a text-based like mode of communication is okay. But if it's truly urgent, I think it's important that the mode be indicative of that. And what better way than a phone call or something that, you're getting that instant response back. I don't know. I guess those are just all my thoughts on like the concepts of communication. And I don't know. I just feel like kind of just exploring this concept because I think it's something that, especially from an organizational effectiveness like lens, it's something that I've just seen a lot of organizations kind of like get wrong, like, so to speak, not like wrong like in like a negative way, but it's just like, do we understand the pros and the cons of communicating in certain ways, right? Like that there's a time and a place for them. And I think that's something that's really important to just understand. So I don't know. The aim of this episode is to kind of just explore those topics like a little bit more. And I don't know. I'm looking at these questions here, and it's like, I don't know. I kind of feel like I did cover a lot of them, but why not just kind of expand on some of these questions a little bit more? And let's move on to question number 1. Okay, question number 1. When did I sent it start to get treated like the same thing as you received it? I don't know. The first thing that comes to mind when I read that question is, at least for me, when email came about. But then again, like now I'm thinking in my head, like, I'm thinking of previous industrious like eras of like snail mail, just like a classic, you write a letter, you put it in an envelope, you throw a stamp on it, you put it out into a mailbox, right? And I think maybe that like, because of the latency, like, that if you're doing a snail mail approach, like, do not expect for anybody to respond in a prompt way, right? Like, I think you just kind of know that. And then, I don't know, I'm thinking about things like the telegram, like the telephone, right? All of those things were a lot faster, right? There's things that are instantly happening, and like the message is coming through and you're interacting with it like in real time, right? Whether it's a conversation or it's it's a Morse code kind of thing, right? Like you're getting that instant like response. And so now where my mind is going is maybe it's a scale thing. Maybe when email and instant like messengers first came out, maybe the scale of the work was so small that like you could send a message and you could get an instant reaction because maybe there just wasn't enough happening at a given point in time that it did seem instant, right? So maybe it is actually kind of a scale thing. But as I look at 2026, and just throughout like my career, I used to be able to get back to my emails much faster, but as, endeavors change and, like you're doing just more and more things, I think, there's a latency of sorts that's just automatically created. And if I'm just coming to this realization of this while I'm doing this podcast, like just being able to articulate it like in that sense, maybe just we haven't caught up to that yet. I think maybe we're all just kind of crossing this bridge of just understanding that more and more people don't have time to answer these text-based communication things, right? I'm seeing it all over the place, and I have for quite some time. And I've always been a proponent with the teams that I've worked with is that, if you're looking for a quick response, the mode of communication needs to be conducive to that quick response. but equally, and so like for instance, just to like make it like less cryptic, is a conversation, is a huddle of sorts, is some sort of, conversation like with words out of your mouth. But it's equally important that you're doing it in a succinct way. Otherwise, you could get stuck in, we've all seen it, the trap of like meetings and alignments and huddles and all this stuff, right? Where it just becomes like word vomit almost ad nauseum, right? Where now you're just talking way too much. And it's kind of a funny thing, even as I say that, I'm like, oh, maybe this podcast is kind of that, but also that's kind of the reason why I created it too. So anyways, it's kind of like a meta joke of sorts. But anyways, my point is that maybe we're just crossing a bridge of sorts to where we do need to get back to like radio-based communication, right? Very short, quick exchanges of information and confirmations from the receiving side that the message was received. That's just what my gut tells me. And I don't know, just working throughout the years, that seems to have worked out pretty well. And, I feel like I could do a whole other episode about this, but it's always a shame. It's happened from time to time. There's a few that, there's a few examples that like stand out in my head where it's just like, man, if this was communicated, the thing was communicated through something that was more conducive of a response, right? Maybe we wouldn't have had certain like problems arise. But it's interesting. I have empathy all around for everybody because there's just so many things that are going on, right? That it's just like, you may not feel like you have enough time to pick up the phone and have a phone call like with somebody, and that it's easier to just write the thing out and send it, right? But then it's also, we all just need to be understanding of like the costs, where it's like, the phone call could take more like energy, so to speak, right? But if you go the text-based route, you're going to have to be okay that you're maybe not going to get a response back. Or maybe it's a hybrid of them both, where it's like, hey, take some time, think about it, write the message, send the message, right? The text-based communication or communique or whatever you want to call it. Give it a little bit, follow up like with a phone call, directing the person like, hey, I sent you some stuff. There's a lot of it. Take a look at like your email and let me know if there's any questions, right? I almost think maybe, I don't know, it's a silly thing to say, but it's like, that's probably like the best of like both worlds. Yeah, I don't know. I think there is something to say though, like, maybe I'll do a whole like separate episode of on this topic, but when there's like, when conversation gets stuck with an email, actually, you know what? I just realized I already did an episode about this where it's, like don't draft, talk. Yeah, I think that was like episode 4 or something like that. Anyways, maybe go back and check out like that one because it kind of ties into this particular theme here. But yeah, just, if you're looking for a quick answer, make sure that your mode of communication is conducive to it. I think that's ultimately what I'm trying to say. And I don't know, let's just move on to question number 2 and we'll wrap that one right there. All right, question number 2. Why are we choosing speed and convenience over clarity, then acting surprised when things get messy? I don't know, I feel like I kind of answered this in question number 1. I think it's just people don't understand what the costs are to the particular, call it like mode of communication. Why are we choosing speed and convenience over clarity, then acting surprised when things get messy? I also just can't help but feel like when I read that question back and I think back in my head of like, just maybe the past like 10 years, like there's just a lot that's going on and it's very overwhelming and people feel like they can't move like fast enough. And I think there's almost this kind of trap where you feel like you sent the message out and then like it was received, and maybe it's because you ascribe to, like, maybe you're the type of person that's really good at keeping up with your email, so why wouldn't the person on the other side? But I think that's also just understanding the different like styles of individual people. And I feel like, me personally, I do spend a lot of time trying to understand how the other person prefers to communicate and then conform my way to fit those needs, right? But then also just maintaining progress and keeping things like moving. And I don't know, I think maybe as I just think about that thought more, I think there just needs to be more of a general understanding of just empathy, I guess. I don't know. That sounds like really intense and whatever, but I think I don't know. I just can't help but feel like we just need to get back to basics, like of understanding modes of communication and the pros and the cons of each. I think it was much, maybe there's like a misunderstanding in this era, in the sense that like, oh, people have historically responded to emails and like a DM or an IM really fast. So like, what's slowing them down now? Like, oh my God, I'm never going to get the answer to the thing. But like, if you look at like previous industrious like eras where you had the telephone, you had a telegraph, and I hope it's a telegraph. Oh my God. If it's something else, stand by, guys. I need to make sure that this is actually, I cannot even believe. Thank God. Yes, it is a telegraph. I cannot believe I just had a moment where I was like, wait, is that really called a telegraph? Wow, that was quite the moment. Anyways, right, so if we look back at those previous industrious like eras, I think it was really plain to see. Like, if you wrote a letter and you put it in an envelope and you put a stamp on it and you walk downstairs and you put it like in a mailbox, like, do not expect to get an answer back quickly. There's just no way. And I think maybe there's just this kind of like illusion of sorts, where like at one point in time, email and IMs, people could respond back quickly, and maybe that's just not the case anymore. And also, like, if you're trying to have like nuanced conversations about a complex topic, it's like, oh, you do that through like written communication. And again, this is in like episode 4, but that's a whole other like can of worms, so to speak. So I don't know. I think, let me just get back to the question here. Why are we choosing speed and convenience over clarity, then acting surprised when things get messy? Again, I think just fundamentally, it's just people not understanding what the costs are, or the pros and the cons of a particular like mode of communication. And I think it's just important that we get back to basics. And I think that's a really good place to end that question. So I'm going to end it right there. All right, question number 3. What would it look like to bring back real confirmation without turning everything into a control freak check-in? Wow, that's interesting. I never thought about that part of it, right? I think, wow, I almost feel like I'm having an aha like moment for myself, where it's like, yeah, could asking for a receipt on something be, viewed as like micromanagey? Yeah, it totally could. And I could see why. And I think maybe that kind of ties into like a leadership topic, where it's like, setting the expectation up front that like, within like a unit or a team, right? Like, this is why we do these things, right? This is why we value short, precise communication with a copy that in so many words, like as a response, right? Is because we got so many things that need to get done, and we need to make sure that the exchange of information is clear, right? But I think if you don't, and it's really interesting, it's like, if you don't set those expectations up front, right, then it could be perceived as micromanagement. And I totally get that. And I think it's just, oh, I don't know. I think that now ties into a whole other topic regarding like leadership and setting expectations, like with your team, of what you do and do not expect out of them, and also explaining to them the strategic, I guess, call it rationale, right? There's a reason why we conduct ourselves in this way, and it's how, like, this is how it helps us as in, like, how it helps us as individuals, us as a team, and then us as like a broader team. So I don't know, what would it look like to bring back real confirmation without turning everything into a control freak check-in? Yeah, I don't know. I think the more I think about that question, I look back at it, it's just like, that to me is like a net separate problem, where if it feels like a control freak check-in, so to speak, it's probably just because you haven't set those expectations with your team, that that's what's going on. And I think maybe, and actually it's interesting now, like even as I think about this, right, like I'm conscientious of people that, because I know, like I have a tendency, for instance, to check in with folks and just make sure that, you know, things were received okay. And I think I'm conscientious of the fact that, like, if I were to write a message, especially in like a written way, right, of like, you know, what's your status, right, or something like along those lines, right, like, because again, when you're doing text-based communication, like you're losing like the nuance and the body language. So I think it's really important that, you know, in this context, right, that your understanding of how your message could be received by the other party, and then to communicate in kind of like a disarming way. And it's, for me, it's the absolute truth. Like I really do just let them know, like, this is just a routine, like check-in, like what's your status on the thing. I'm not trying to point a finger at anything. It's just, you know, like, you know, what's going on, like with this thing, so that we could advance this other thing. And I don't know, I think it's just important that everybody finds a style in that way, that, and you know, this could be an entirely other like episode, right, is maybe I'll do a follow-up to the whole like don't draft talk episode, because it's just like, when you're doing text-based communication, oh my God, like the body language isn't there, your tone, like mannerisms, the rhythm, the pacing, it's absent. And so it's literally just the words right there. And like, if you're, depending on how you are feeling that day, you could read those words and take them in a certain way, right? And so now all of a sudden there's tension created in such a way where you're like, whoa, hold on, wait, what just happened, right? And I don't know, I guess the more I think about it is like, I'm definitely going to do a follow-up like episode to that, because I just don't think that us as human beings were designed to communicate in that way, right? Because like there's the non like verbal cues that are so important that just are lost in text-based communication. And man, I don't know, this is kind of like a hot take, but like the more that I'm thinking about this, and the more that, you know, we're kind of exploring these topics, I'm like, man, is email, like, it's just email and instant messaging, like, ooh, I don't know. There's like a lot of responsibility that comes along with that, like knowing when to use it, how to use it. And yeah, I don't know. But even then, so like, even if you were to default back to like some sort of like a telephone or an in-person conversation, right? Like you need to be able to conduct yourself well within that context. Or I guess you could call it like a domain. So now the more that I think about that, maybe I just need to do a whole other separate episode on like communication, like best practices, I guess. Ugh, but that sounds kind of like sterile. I just think it's really important that we all have like a sense of empathy, and that we understand what the other person is responsible for, what could potentially like be on their plate at that point in time, and then to communicate in such a way that's understanding and respectful of all of those things, right? Oh man, I don't know. That's a whole other episode, I guess. I don't know. Let's just try to answer this question cleanly. What would it look like to bring back real confirmation without turning everything into a control freak check-in? I think that's a whole other different like domain. What would it look like to bring back real confirmation without turning everything into a control freak check-in? Yeah, that just goes back to setting expectations like with your team, that this is how we communicate. Being empathetic to some people could perceive checking in on something as a micromanagey control freak thing. People may not understand your strategic intent on checking in on the thing. There's just a lot that comes along with it, and I just think like in order for it to not be construed as like a control freak check-in thing, there's so many other things that need to be considered. So that's a good place to end that question, I think. Yeah, let's end it there. Okay, let's move on to the closing segment of the show where I attempt to put a bow on this entire topic. So yeah, the general theme of this episode is sent does not mean received. And that is true. And I think when we, looking at it through the lens of this episode with regard to like email and instant like messengers, I just think combination between it working well in the past relative to understanding the mode of communication. Like if you can wait for some time to go by to get an answer, that's okay. That's what that mode of communication is okay for. If it's an urgent thing, I think you need to change the mode that's more conducive to that. I also think, and like I really do not want to go down a rabbit hole in this episode, but it's like I want to like allude to it. But like there's ways where we can program like automations where like if you send out a message and you don't get a response back on it, like to a degree, right? Or at least like make it easier to send a follow-up, right? There's ways to do that, I guess. And in the previous episode, I was talking about the GTD like methodology. And, for those of you who are aware of what that kind of productivity hack is, right? We all know you could use a tagging system of sorts, like waiting for, right? So then you could like filter out in your list things that you're like waiting for a response to come back on. God, I just remember I was reading a book a long time ago. Maybe it was like a leadership book or it was like a Scrum book. I can't remember, but it was like a project management, like for dummies book. I just thought it was a really interesting point. And maybe I can just use this to kind of like close up the episode because like I could talk about way too many things right now. But like I remember it was like this anecdotal story about like this person didn't find out until it was like too late that like the aircraft parts couldn't be ordered. But, they could have found that out sooner had they had some sort of like reminder of sorts. I'm actually just realizing right now is like this story doesn't fully make sense. I guess what I'm just trying to say is that like it's very interesting from like a text-based communication standpoint where it's like if you send out a message and you don't get a response back until like 2 weeks or like the day of like a deadline, like don't be upset with the person who didn't respond to the message, because you, as the sender of the message, should understand the stipulations that come along with the mode of communication. So like, don't blame this person for missing the equivalent of like a scratch piece of paper, like thrown on their desk when there's hundreds others just like it. And just excuse yourself from accountability or responsibility of like, well, I sent you a message, how come you didn't read it? And it's like, I don't know. I mean, me personally, I've come across that a lot in my professional time, career, whatever you want to call it. And I've found ways to explain to those people like, hey, like, look, like, we're not pointing a finger here, but like, you need to understand that the mode of communication that you used, you can't fault that person on the other side for not like doing the thing. You have a responsibility to get a confirmation of receipt from that person, right? And I think that that's a stipulation, that's a condition that needs to be understood with something like text-based communication. Because like, think about it, if you were in a conversation and you were talking to that person and you gave them an order and they didn't do anything to confirm like receipt of that message, whether it's through like a head nod or a thumbs up or like a verbal, yep, I got it, you wouldn't leave the conversation. You would maybe be like a little shook where you're just like, hey, can you confirm? Like, did you understand everything like that I said? And even as I think about this, I don't know, it's just interesting when I look back at like the teams that, I've led and the teams that I've worked with, I think that there's sometimes, and maybe it's just a sign of the current era, but it's just maybe people are just afraid to talk to one another in a direct way, right? I mean, I already know that as I say that out loud, and I think maybe we just need to get back to the basics on that, right? I think I don't know. I just think as I'm just trying to wrap up this episode, it's just like, if a teammate were to say like, did you read my email or did you not like get my email? Like, that's indicative of a larger issue. And I think it's leadership's job to kind of help the team get back to basics of like the basics of good communication. Because I think we've all encountered that comment from time to time. And I think it's important to not just take that at like face like value, because the mode of communication is not conducive to, an instant confirmation. And I think the more that that's not understood, I guess, the more things are going to slow down. I don't know. Now I just feel like I'm ranting, but you guys, you get what I'm trying to say, is that like, I think if I had to put a bow on this entire episode, it's that everybody needs to understand the stipulations that come along with certain like modes of communication, right? And to use them at the proper time, and to just know what the costs are, or just like what comes along with it. So yeah, I feel like that's a nice place to end this episode. So let's just end it right there. Guys, thank you once again for checking out another episode of the Frame Found Podcast. I really do appreciate it. If you're new to this podcast, appreciate you checking it out. If you want to know more about what this podcast is all about, check out the first episode. And also, you'll probably catch that, I got like a little bit of a speech impediment of sorts. And if you're curious about, kind of what that is, check out episode number 2. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Would love to hear your guys' like thoughts in the comments. Really any other like prompting questions on this topic and really on any of the episodes. It's kind of interesting, like as I'm going through, I've got these outlines in front of me. I'm like, oh, like that's a question, that's a question, that's a question. Oh, that's a good one to explore too, right? And I think, me personally, I would just really appreciate it. I would love if you guys threw in some questions there, just so I can kind of like see where your guys' head is at. It's also just kind of an inspiring thing to me when I hear questions from other people, because it's like, oh, that's an interesting part of the topic to explore. And so, I don't know. Would love to do that a lot more. Don't feel the need to comment, obviously, but I would appreciate it. And yeah, we'll just end that episode right there, and appreciate you guys checking it out. And I will see you all on next week's episode. Thank you, everybody.